enough, I was trained as an ornithologist and did a lot of my first work with birds. But then when I came here, I went back to some work I had done for my master's and started working with fish and turtles. And from there, I extended it out to starting working with the largest turtles in the world, leatherback turtles, down in Central America and Costa Rica. The long-term focus of my research has always been to understand the biology of these animals, their reproduction, and their conservation. Some of the work we're doing now has moved out to trying to understand what they do in the ocean using very, very technical satellite telemetry to follow their movements in the ocean, to get their diving patterns, to find out where they go in the ocean, what parts of the ocean they use, the water temperature, what impacts the currents have, and so on. Well, what's exciting about it right now is we're learning a lot about the Pacific Ocean and climate change. The work that I'm doing has given us 25 years of baseline data so that we can now start to go back and look at things before we believe global warming was becoming a very potent issue. A lot of people said when I first came to IPFW that I would not be able to run a first-rate research program. And I actually have. And because of that, since I've been at IPFW, I've actually published 3 papers in the world's leading journal called Nature. What I find most rewarding is being able to take students with me and getting them excited about the field, extending the knowledge of what I'm doing and what I'm working with, stimulating the minds of those students to go on their own. You're constantly growing, and that's what's exciting about the field. That's why you see scientists, when they're in there, they very rarely retire. They usually get eaten by whatever it is they're researching, or drown or die or something. But your passion really is 2 things for me: is my family and my research, and both of them have been very rewarding to me.
I come from a long line of preachers, but I've always had interest in religion, I think, because of that. At the same time, I've desperately wanted to avoid the family business. At every chance, I've tried to learn more about religion. There's a lot of interest in religion, but I don't think a lot of people have been exposed to the academic study of religion. And so religious studies is an area where we encourage students to explore broadly in faith, not just focus on their own. I've always been fascinated by the ways in which culture gets transformed in new locations. I'm not from the South. I've lived my entire life in the North, and yet there's something completely Southern about my orientation towards religion. So what I've been interested in is how is it that we can trace out what is particularly Southern, what is particularly rural about expressions of faith amongst these African Americans here in Fort Wayne. The reason why I'm fascinated with that is because I think it's connected to a larger question, and that is, what is African about being African American? My most recent significant discovery or accomplishment had to do with a project I worked on just last year. Well, this church had their bicentennial history this year. It's one of the oldest black congregations. It's in Harlem. And as the story goes, the church was founded by some Ethiopian coffee merchants who were in New York at the turn of the 19th century and went to First Baptist Church, which is a white congregation, to worship, and were turned away because they were black, and they started this other church. Well, I was always suspicious of that story, but had no documentation. And through my digging, I was unable to find any Ethiopians in New York City, in 1808. And so this legend that's a wonderful story, but it's not rooted in fact at all. Has that changed their perception of the story? No. In fact, they still tell the story. And I've published on this, and I've demonstrated it's not true. But it tells you something about the veracity of myth. Well, my wife says I'm hard-headed. I like tenacious better. I have a real stick-to-itive spirit, and it serves me well as a historian.
What I've done is looked at differences in the way that men and women find their way in using several methods. First, I started out by simply asking people what strategies they use if they have to find a new place. There's a tendency for men more than women to think of the way an environment is laid out in terms of the compass directions. There is a lot of overlap. There are many women who use north, south, east, and west in their directions, and many men who rely on landmarks. So looking at gender differences is just a convenient way to study differences because you can compare the average for men to the average for women and see what's different about them. The reason that I was interested in that is because I myself am somewhat directionally challenged, which means that I pretty much get lost when making decisions about which way to go in a new area. And I have noticed that some other people don't as easily get lost as I do. We are trying to create a virtual environment that we can change to see what things may help people in buildings that are confusing. And so my idea was to try some kind of a color coding of hallways that would make sense to people as a way for them to develop a better overview of the whole building. IPFW is unusual in that there are more opportunities for undergraduates to work directly with professors. In larger research institutions, that's often not the case. And here, I think students can benefit greatly by directly working with the professors themselves.
My first foray into Albanian history in the 1970s resulted in sort of an eye-opening discoveries about the uniqueness of this particular area in Europe. I mean, here is an area which is, 40 kilometers away from Italy, and in the 70s still had a social structure which was reminiscent of maybe the 16th century. And what I'm trying to get at with my students is simply levels of development in Europe. I mean, I'm considered a specialist in the Balkans, of course, and much of my research now is on contemporary affairs. I am on occasion asked to consult with various government agencies, and I also, again, as a country expert, I frequently am asked to testify in political asylum cases in federal courts. But my previous work has sort of centered on Albania. I did a biography of the Albanian king, who was ultimately tossed out by Mussolini in 1939. And then I wrote a book on Albania during World War II, and my most recent book is an edited piece called Balkan Strongmen. My hope for the future is essentially to create understanding amongst the various peoples of the Balkans by creating a history that they can all more or less accept, and a recognition that all of them essentially went through similar experiences and have a similar future. In 2006, I was elected as a member of the Albanian Academy of Sciences, which is, probably the premier sort of academic, intellectual institution in the country. It was to a certain extent a vindication, I guess, of my approach in terms of history, and I was pleased certainly to learn that my Albanian colleagues value my work. I teach from my research, and I demonstrate that I do more than simply read books and spend time in dusty archives. I mean, I go out and meet people. I'm involved in the process of Albania's transition. I consider myself to be committed to my students. I very much love teaching. I love to involve my students in the process in terms of helping them to understand the process and hopefully encouraging them to continue.
I look at the intersection between one's psychological well-being and one's physical well-being and how those two intersect. Anytime you say psychological factors associated with medical illness, they think you're saying they're crazy. No, it's just another aspect of the same disease process. And that's the whole point of my research. I'm doing my research on a couple of different tracks, if you will, in health psychology. I'm taking a look at some particular types of individual characteristics that have an impact on the way that people experience physical symptoms associated with disease. I just got done collecting a whole bunch of interview data with methamphetamine addicts. And what interests me is we think of meth as a club drug. I mean, that's kind of the picture people have. We see it on the coast in the big cities. People go to clubs, or people in the hood in Chicago. But what is it about rural middle America, which is where we're seeing probably one of the most significant rises in methamphetamine use? And so what are the psychosocial characteristics of the rural methamphetamine user who then also engages in other high-risk sexual behaviors? What are the connections there? I think I'm enthusiastic about what I do, and I do some interesting stuff. I think my stuff is appealing to students. And so I think, like to give them hands-on stuff, which is more fun than sitting down and listening to a lecture. I mean, I'll even say that, and I'm the one giving the lectures. Boat rocker, absolutely. I live to challenge the status quo. See, I'm a really good advocate for those underserved people because I challenge the way that things have always been done. The phrase that drives me the craziest, that's the way we've always done it, which to me is the exact reason to not do it anymore.
Musicologist, which means that I'm a music historian, and I combine music theory with music history, and in my case also music performance. I'm interested in something that's called performance art, and that is my hard research area. In terms of my more creative area, I play instruments that evolved during the Renaissance, and so I am a performer on the viola da gamba, and I play music that was written Middle Ages, Renaissance, and into the Baroque. I try to bring everything into the classroom, whether it's art, film, literature, and I bring this all to bear on the lives of the composers and the performers that we study, because those people were not composing in a vacuum. Putting on concerts always provides a brand new challenge each time, because for this kind of music, one is choosing a new cast of characters. One begins a search each time one starts a new piece of music, and each time one puts together a performance. There are always new problems to solve. When you're absolutely in tune, and when the rhythm is happening, when everything is happening as it should happen, I don't think there's a better experience on earth. That's when I know I've done the right thing. Melancholia was a fashionable affect in the Renaissance. And because of that kind of humor or that kind of thoughtfulness, there was so much great art that was produced. And much of the music that we play is melancholic music, meaning that it's not always bouncy. It's thoughtful music, it's quiet music, it's very complicated music, very paradoxical music, I think.
As a bioarchaeologist, I'm often brought in to examine collections once they've been excavated by archaeologists, but on occasion I've been called in to actually help excavate the skeletal materials that archaeologists have uncovered themselves. I guess I'm still very much a kid at heart, and I've always been fascinated by dinosaurs and skeletons. Sometimes I can't believe I get to work with the very earliest human skeletons of the New World, the earliest mummies in the world, or human sacrifices. It's a somewhat morbid topic, but it really is pretty exciting. There's a couple of main areas that I try to investigate. One is how many migratory events occurred in the prehistory of South America. But then the second question is how we see these cultural differences. People would intentionally use different kinds of ceramics, different kinds of textiles. They would intentionally deform or modify their skulls as a way of signifying cultural differences. Probably my most significant accomplishment have been my studies on the Moche sacrificial victims. The Moche were a prehistoric state between around AD 200 and AD 750, and their ceramics are really quite well known amongst art historians. They depict iconographically many scenes of battles between warriors. And so in recent years, within the past couple of decades, they've begun uncovering actual human sacrifices. And so what my research has been on is trying to identify who these human sacrifices were. The things that do kind of define what drive me is the potential to be wrong. And as a scientist, that might sound I don't know, kind of contrary, but when I'm wrong, that means that there's a whole lot more out there for me to learn and understand. I think about my research every day, almost all day. I dream about my research. I dream about my teaching. And to be quite honest, when I'm doing my research, I just can't wait to get back and talk about it with my students. So the teaching is always with me as well.